November 21st, 2021. Waukesha, Wisconsin. A Sunday afternoon. Families lined the streets. Children held candy bags. Parents sipped hot cocoa. Everyone bundled in winter coats. Smiling, laughing, excited. They'd come to watch the annual Christmas parade. A beloved tradition. 58 years running. Marching bands. Dance groups. Santa Claus. Joy. Innocence. Community. Then a red Ford Escape SUV came barreling down Main Street. Didn't slow down. Didn't stop. Drove straight into the parade. Into the crowds. Into the families. Into the children. The SUV zigzagged. Deliberate. Intentional. Striking people. Running them over. Leaving bodies in the street. Leaving chaos. Leaving horror. 6 people would die. Over 60 would be injured. And the man behind the wheel had been released from jail just 2 days earlier, on $1,000 bail, for trying to run over his girlfriend. The system had failed, and Waukesha would pay the price. This case will devastate you, because it could have been prevented. Before we continue, share, subscribe, and turn on notifications. What happened in Waukesha shows how bail reform can turn deadly. The Waukesha Christmas Parade was a cherished tradition. Every year since 1963, the Sunday before Thanksgiving, Main Street would close, floats would line up, bands would warm up, families would arrive early, stake out the best viewing spots. This was small-town America at its finest. Safe, wholesome, family-friendly. November 21st, 2021 was no different. Perfect weather for late November. Cold but not freezing. No snow. Clear skies. Families came from all over, not just Waukesha, surrounding communities, Milwaukee suburbs, people who'd been attending for years, for decades, bringing their children, who'd bring their children someday. Generational tradition. The parade was scheduled to start at 4 p.m. By 3:30, the streets were packed. Thousands of people, lining both sides of Main Street, children sitting on curbs, parents standing behind them, grandparents in lawn chairs, everyone waiting, anticipating, ready for joy, ready for the start of the Christmas season. They had no idea that in 30 minutes, their lives would change forever. The parade began on time. 4 p.m. The first groups started down Main Street. The Waukesha South High School marching band, playing Christmas music. Students in uniform, instruments shining, parents cheering. Then the Milwaukee Dancing Grannies, a beloved group, women in their 50s, 60s, 70s, dancing, waving, bringing smiles. They'd performed in this parade for years, were a highlight, a favorite. Behind them came more groups, more bands, more dancers. The parade stretched for blocks, participants excited, spectators delighted, everything perfect, everything normal, everything safe, or so everyone thought. At 4:39 p.m., something changed. People at the beginning of the parade route heard it first. An engine, revving, loud, getting closer, fast, too fast. A red SUV came speeding down Main Street, from behind the parade, going the wrong way, against the flow. People assumed it was a mistake. Someone lost, confused, would realize and turn around. But the SUV didn't turn around, didn't slow down, didn't stop, kept coming, faster, heading straight for the parade, straight for the people, straight for the families. The first impact was the Waukesha South High School marching band. The SUV plowed into the students from behind, hit them at high speed. Bodies flew, instruments scattered, students screaming, parents screaming. The SUV didn't stop, kept going, swerving, zigzagging, hitting more people. The Milwaukee Dancing Grannies were next. The SUV drove straight into them, struck multiple women, killed some instantly, injured others critically, still didn't stop, kept accelerating, kept hitting people, adults, children, elderly, didn't discriminate, just kept driving, kept destroying, kept killing. Witnesses described horror, absolute horror, bodies flying through the air, People lying in the street, blood everywhere, screaming, chaos, panic, parents grabbing their children, running, trying to get to safety. But where was safe? The SUV was everywhere, driving erratically, intentionally hitting people, targeting crowds. One witness said it looked like the SUV was deliberately aiming for people, swerving to hit more, not trying to avoid anyone, trying to hit everyone. Another witness said the SUV was driving so fast, people had no chance to get out of the way. No warning, no time to react, just impact, just trauma, just death. The SUV drove for several blocks, through the entire parade route, hitting people the whole way. Police were there, at the parade, for security. They saw what was happening, started chasing the SUV, on foot, in vehicles, shouting for the driver to stop. The driver didn't stop, kept going. One officer fired shots at the SUV, trying to stop it, trying to save lives. The shots didn't stop the driver. He kept going. Eventually, the SUV drove past the parade, into a residential area. The driver abandoned the vehicle, ran, tried to escape, tried to blend in, tried to get away with what he'd done. But he wouldn't get far. Police were searching. The community was searching. And the man who'd just driven through a Christmas parade, who'd just killed 6 people and injured over 60 others, would be caught. His name was Darrell Brooks Jr. He was 39 years old, and he'd been released from jail 2 days earlier, on $1,000 bail, for trying to run over his girlfriend with his car. The immediate aftermath of the Waukesha Christmas parade attack was chaos. Pure chaos. Bodies in the street, injured people everywhere, children crying, parents screaming, first responders overwhelmed, police, paramedics, fire department, all responding, all trying to help. But there were too many victims, too many injuries, too much trauma. The parade route became a triage center. Medical personnel assessed injuries on the street. Who needed help first? Who was critical? Who could wait? Impossible decisions. Heartbreaking decisions. Ambulances lined up, taking the injured to hospitals. Multiple hospitals. Waukesha, Milwaukee, anywhere with capacity, anywhere that could help. The emergency rooms were overwhelmed. Doctors, nurses, all hands on deck, treating parade victims, broken bones, internal injuries, head trauma, critical conditions. Some victims would survive, some wouldn't. 6 people would die from injuries sustained when Darrell Brooks drove his SUV into them. Let's remember their names. Virginia Sorensen, 79 years old, member of the Milwaukee Dancing Grannies, had been dancing in parades for years, brought joy to thousands, loved performing, loved her community, struck by the SUV, killed. Leanna Owen, 71 years old, also a Milwaukee Dancing Granny, retired, grandmother, loved dancing, loved life, struck by the SUV, killed. Tamara Durand, 52 years old, another dancing granny, elementary school teacher, loved children, loved teaching, loved dancing, struck by the SUV, killed. Wilhelm Hospel, 81 years old, wasn't performing in the parade, was helping, walking alongside the dancing grannies, supporting them, being kind, struck by the SUV, killed. Jane Coolidge, 52 years old, Citizens Bank employee, participating in the parade, representing her employer, excited to be there, struck by the SUV, killed. Jackson Sparks, 8 years old, 3rd grader, walking in the parade with his baseball team, loved baseball, loved his family, had his whole life ahead of him, struck by the SUV, suffered critical injuries, died 2 days later in the hospital. 8 years old, gone, because Darrell Brooks drove an SUV into a Christmas parade. Over 60 others were injured, some critically, some with life-altering injuries, broken bones, traumatic brain injuries, amputations, paralysis, physical injuries that would require surgeries, rehabilitation, years of recovery, Some would never fully recover, would live with disabilities, with pain, with limitations, all because they attended a Christmas parade, all because they wanted to watch bands, wanted to see Santa, wanted to celebrate the season, with their families, with their community, and Darrell Brooks took that from them, took their safety, their health, their innocence, their joy. But the injuries weren't just physical. The psychological trauma was immense. Thousands of people witnessed the attack, saw the SUV driving into people, saw bodies flying, saw the carnage, saw the horror. Children saw things no child should see. Adults saw things that would haunt them forever. Post-traumatic stress, nightmares, anxiety, depression, fear, inability to feel safe, inability to trust. The psychological wounds would last for years, for lifetimes. Therapy would help some, but couldn't erase the memories, couldn't undo what they'd seen, what they'd experienced, what Darrell Brooks had done. While first responders helped victims, police searched for Darrell Brooks. He'd abandoned his red SUV about 5 blocks from the parade route, left it on a residential street, ran. Police found the vehicle quickly, knew who it was registered to. Darrell Brooks Jr., 39 years old, from Milwaukee, had an extensive criminal history, was out on bail, had been released from jail just 2 days earlier. On November 19, 2021, police began searching the area, going door to door, talking to residents, looking for Brooks, warning people. A dangerous man was on the loose, had just killed multiple people, could be armed, could be dangerous. Lock your doors. Stay inside. Call 911 if you see anything suspicious. About 20 minutes after the attack, a resident on Waukesha's east side called 911, said a man had knocked on his door, asked to use his phone, said he was waiting for an Uber. The man looked cold, wet, distressed. The homeowner let him in, gave him a jacket, let him warm up, didn't realize this was Darrell Brooks. Didn't know about the parade attack yet. News travels fast, but not that fast. The homeowner called 911 not to report Brooks, but for another reason. When police arrived at the house, they immediately recognized Brooks. From the SUV registration, from the description, this was their suspect. This was the man who'd just driven through the Waukesha Christmas parade, who'd just killed 6 people, who'd just injured over 60 others. Police arrested Darrell Brooks, took him into custody, read him his rights. The manhunt was over. Brooks was caught, but the nightmare was just beginning. At the hospital, doctors fought to save lives, to treat injuries, to provide care. Jackson Sparks, the 8-year-old boy struck by Brooks' SUV, was in critical condition. Severe head trauma, brain injury, internal injuries. Doctors did everything they could. Surgeries, medications, interventions. Jackson's family prayed, hoped, begged God for a miracle. But on November 23, 2021, 2 days after the attack, Jackson Sparks died. His injuries were too severe. His 8-year-old body couldn't survive, couldn't recover. Jackson became the 6th fatality, the youngest victim, a 3rd grader, who loved baseball, who loved his family, who had dreams, who had a future, all stolen by Darrell Brooks, who'd driven an SUV into a Christmas parade, who'd killed a child, who'd destroyed a family, who'd traumatized a community. The question everyone was asking was simple. How? How did this happen? How was Darrell Brooks free? How was he out of jail? How was he able to drive through a parade and kill 6 people? The answer was infuriating. Systemic failure. Complete systemic failure. Darrell Brooks had an extensive criminal history, over 50 prior arrests, convictions for domestic violence, for battery, for bail jumping, for resisting arrest, for drug offenses, for firearms offenses, for recklessly endangering safety. Over and over, Brooks had been arrested, charged, convicted, given light sentences, released, and arrested again. The cycle repeated. For years, for decades, the system kept letting Brooks go, kept giving him chances, kept putting him back on the streets, where he could hurt people, where he could kill people. Just 2 days before the parade attack, Brooks had been involved in another incident. On November 2nd, 2021, he'd gotten into an argument with his girlfriend. The argument escalated. Brooks became violent, punched his girlfriend, then tried to run her over with his SUV. The same red Ford Escape he'd later drive into the parade. The girlfriend called police. Brooks was arrested, charged with resisting arrest, bail jumping, and second-degree recklessly endangering safety. Serious charges. Charges that should have kept him locked up, should have protected the public, should have prevented what happened on November 21st. But the Milwaukee County District Attorney's Office set bail at $1,000. Just $1,000 for a repeat offender, for someone with 50-plus prior arrests, for someone who'd just tried to run over his girlfriend. Brooks posted bail, was released on November 19, 2021. 2 days later, he drove through the Waukesha Christmas parade, killed 6 people, injured over 60 others. The $1,000 bail decision would haunt everyone involved, would raise questions about bail reform, about progressive prosecution policies, about public safety, about whether the system prioritized criminals over victims, over innocent people, over communities. Darrell Brooks Jr. was born on February 21, 1982, in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. Grew up in the area, had a troubled childhood, troubled adolescence, troubled adulthood. By age 39, Brooks had accumulated over 50 arrests. Over 50 times police had taken him into custody, had charged him with crimes, had put him through the system, and over 50 times the system had let him go, had given him another chance, had released him to offend again, to hurt more people, to escalate. Brooks' criminal history wasn't just extensive. It was violent. It was predatory. It showed a pattern the system should have recognized, should have stopped, but didn't. Brooks' earliest arrests were for property crimes, theft, burglary, drug offenses, typical criminal escalation, starting small, getting bolder. But Brooks didn't stay with property crimes. He escalated to violence, to crimes against people. His first domestic violence arrest came in his 20s. Assaulted a girlfriend, was charged, was convicted, was given probation. No jail time, just probation. This set a pattern. Brooks would commit domestic violence, would get arrested, would get light sentences, would be released, would offend again. The cycle repeated. Multiple girlfriends, multiple victims, multiple arrests, all with minimal consequences. In 1999, Brooks was convicted of substantial battery with intent to cause bodily harm. A serious charge, a violent charge. He received 2 years of probation, no prison time. In 2002, he was arrested for marijuana possession, given a fine. In 2003, he was arrested for battery. Again, more domestic violence, more probation. In 2006, he faced charges for criminal trespass and battery. Again, minimal consequences. In 2010, he was arrested for strangulation and suffocation. Tried to choke his victim. This is attempted murder. This is life-threatening violence. Brooks was convicted, received 3 years of probation, no prison time, for trying to kill someone. The arrests continued. 2011, 2012, 2013. Domestic violence, battery, resisting arrest, bail jumping, recklessly endangering safety. Every year, multiple times a year, Brooks was arrested, charged, and released. Light sentences, probation, short jail stints. Nothing serious. Nothing that kept him locked up. Nothing that protected his victims. Nothing that protected the public. In 2016, Brooks was arrested for felony bail jumping and marijuana possession. In 2018, more domestic violence. In 2020, even more arrests, drug charges, domestic violence, disorderly conduct. The pattern was clear, obvious, undeniable. Darrell Brooks was a violent repeat offender, was a danger to women, was a danger to society, should have been in prison, should have been kept away from people, but the system kept letting him go. November 2nd, 2021. Just 19 days before the Waukesha parade attack. Brooks was at a gas station with his girlfriend. They got into an argument. Brooks became violent, punched his girlfriend in the face multiple times. She tried to get away, tried to run. Brooks followed, got in his red Ford Escape SUV. The girlfriend ran into traffic, trying to escape. Brooks drove after her, tried to run her over. Witnesses saw it, called police. Brooks fled. Police caught up with him, arrested him, charged him with multiple crimes: resisting arrest, obstructing an officer, disorderly conduct, bail jumping, and second-degree recklessly endangering safety, for trying to run over his girlfriend with a car. These were serious charges. Brooks was already out on bail for another case, already had pending charges. This new arrest should have revoked his existing bail, should have kept him locked up, should have prevented what happened on November 21st. But the Milwaukee County District Attorney's Office made a decision, a catastrophic decision. They recommended bail at $1,000, just $1,000, for a repeat offender with 50-plus arrests, for someone who'd just tried to run over a woman, for someone who'd shown he was dangerous, who was escalating, who was a threat. The DA's office later admitted this was a mistake, said the bail was inappropriately low, said the prosecutor made an error, didn't properly assess Brooks' criminal history, didn't recognize the danger. But the admission came too late, after Brooks had already been released, after he'd already driven through the Waukesha Christmas parade, after 6 people were already dead. On November 19, 2021, 2 days before the parade, Brooks posted the $1,000 bail, was released from jail, was free, free to go wherever he wanted, free to do whatever he wanted. And on November 21st, what Brooks wanted was to drive his red SUV through a Christmas parade, to kill, to maim, to destroy. Whether this was premeditated or impulsive isn't entirely clear. What is clear is that Brooks got in his SUV that afternoon, drove to Waukesha, and drove through the parade, deliberately, intentionally, striking as many people as possible. After his arrest, Brooks was interviewed by police. The interrogation was telling. Brooks showed no remorse, no empathy, no understanding of what he'd done. When asked why he drove through the parade, Brooks gave nonsensical answers. Claimed he didn't know there was a parade. Claimed he was trying to get away from something. Claimed it was an accident. But the evidence contradicted everything. Witnesses saw Brooks deliberately swerving to hit people, saw him accelerate, saw him zigzagging, not trying to avoid people, trying to hit them. The SUV's computer data showed Brooks never hit the brakes, never tried to stop, only accelerated, only sped up. This wasn't an accident. This was intentional. This was mass murder. Brooks was charged with 6 counts of first-degree intentional homicide, 1 for each person he killed. He was also charged with 61 counts of recklessly endangering safety, 1 for each person injured, and multiple counts of hit and run causing death, hit and run causing injury, bail jumping. The charges were extensive, the evidence overwhelming. Brooks faced life in prison, multiple life sentences, would never be free again, would die in prison, for what he did to Waukesha, for what he did to those 6 victims, for what he did to the community. The legal proceedings against Darrell Brooks began in late 2021. He was charged with 77 criminal counts, 6 counts of first-degree intentional homicide, 61 counts of recklessly endangering safety, 6 counts of hit and run causing death, 2 counts of hit and run causing injury, 2 counts of bail jumping. The charges were staggering, the evidence overwhelming, surveillance footage. As we continue this horrific case, like, share, subscribe, and turn on notifications. What happened in Waukesha shows how bail reform can turn deadly. eyewitness testimony, physical evidence, the SUV, computer data showing Brooks never hit the brakes, medical records, autopsy reports, DNA. Everything pointed to Brooks. Everything proved his guilt. This should have been a straightforward case. Quick trial, quick conviction, quick sentencing. But Darrell Brooks had other plans. Plans that would turn his trial into a circus, into a spectacle, into an insult to the victims and their families. Brooks was initially assigned a public defender. Standard procedure. The attorney began preparing a defense. But Brooks wasn't satisfied. Claimed he wanted to represent himself. Wanted to be his own lawyer. The judge warned him, told him this was a bad idea, that he had no legal training, that the charges were serious, that he faced life in prison, that he needed professional representation. Brooks insisted, said he knew the law, could defend himself, didn't trust lawyers, didn't trust the system. The judge reluctantly agreed, allowed Brooks to represent himself, but kept the public defender as standby counsel, to assist if needed, to step in if Brooks changed his mind. This decision would prove catastrophic, would allow Brooks to terrorize the courtroom, to re-traumatize victims, to mock the judicial system. For weeks, the trial was scheduled for October 2022, nearly a year after the attack. The prosecution was ready, had organized their evidence, had prepared their witnesses, had built an airtight case. The defense was not ready, because Brooks wasn't preparing a defense, was preparing a performance, a show, an opportunity to grandstand, to push conspiracy theories, to claim he was a sovereign citizen, to argue that the court had no jurisdiction over him, to waste everyone's time, to cause chaos, to hurt people. Again, before the trial even began, Brooks started filing motions, dozens of motions, claiming the court was illegitimate, that his name was wrong, that he wasn't Darrell Brooks Jr., but rather a sovereign individual, that the American flag in the courtroom had fringe, which somehow meant it was an admiralty court, that Wisconsin law didn't apply to him. The motions were nonsensical, legally frivolous, showed Brooks had no understanding of law, of procedure, of reality. The judge denied every motion, explained patiently why they were wrong, why the court had jurisdiction, why the trial would proceed. Brooks didn't listen, kept filing motions, kept arguing, kept delaying. On October 3, 2022, the trial finally began. Jury selection started. Brooks immediately caused problems, interrupted constantly, objected to everything, made speeches, claimed the proceedings were illegal. The judge had to remove him from the courtroom multiple times, put him in a separate room, with a video feed, so he could watch but not disrupt. Brooks would behave for a while, be allowed back in the courtroom, then start again, interrupting, arguing, being belligerent. This pattern continued throughout the trial. Brooks in the courtroom, Brooks removed, Brooks watching from another room, Brooks brought back, Brooks removed again, over and over. The prosecution began presenting their case, called witnesses, survivors of the attack, people who'd been struck by Brooks' SUV, who'd watched him drive through the parade, who'd seen the carnage. These witnesses had to relive the worst day of their lives, had to describe the horror, the terror, the injuries, while Brooks sat there, smirking sometimes, looking bored other times, showing no remorse, no empathy, no humanity. When Brooks got the chance to cross-examine witnesses, he was cruel, asked inappropriate questions, made accusations, tried to blame the victims, suggested they'd somehow caused their own injuries. The judge had to intervene repeatedly, had to sustain objections, had to tell Brooks to stop. Brooks rarely listened. One of the most painful moments came when the parents of Jackson Sparks testified, the 8-year-old boy who died. His mother and father took the stand, described their son, his love of baseball, his smile, his laugh, his dreams, described watching him in the parade, described seeing the SUV, described Jackson being struck. described his injuries, his 2 days in the hospital, his death. They sobbed on the stand, broke down, had to pause to compose themselves. The entire courtroom was in tears, everyone except Brooks, who sat emotionless, uncaring. When given the chance to cross-examine Jackson's parents, Brooks declined. Even he knew that would be too much. Even he had some limit, some line he wouldn't cross. But his mere presence, his smirk, his attitude, was torture enough. The prosecution presented video evidence, surveillance footage from the parade, showing Brooks' SUV entering Main Street, driving through the parade, striking people, zigzagging, accelerating, not stopping. The footage was horrific, showed the moment of impact, bodies flying, people running, chaos. The jury watched in horror. Some cried, some looked away, some looked physically ill. This was mass murder caught on camera. Undeniable, irrefutable. Brooks watched the footage without emotion, without reaction, like he was watching a nature documentary, not watching himself kill 6 people and injure 61 others. Forensic experts testified about the SUV, about the computer data, about the lack of brake application, about the acceleration, about the deliberate path, about the physics, about the impact, about the injuries caused. Everything pointed to intentionality, to Brooks deliberately driving through the parade, deliberately hitting people, deliberately killing. The defense had no counter. Brooks had no explanation, just nonsense about jurisdiction, about sovereign citizenship, about the court being illegitimate. Nothing that addressed the evidence, nothing that created reasonable doubt, nothing that helped his case. Medical examiners testified about the 6 victims who died, about their injuries, about the cause of death, blunt force trauma, internal injuries, broken bones, crushed organs, bodies not designed to withstand impact from a 2-ton vehicle traveling at high speed. The testimony was clinical, detailed, disturbing. Families of the victims sat in the courtroom, listening to how their loved ones died, what they suffered, how they were destroyed. By Darrell Brooks, who sat at the defense table, looking bored, looking annoyed, looking like he'd rather be anywhere else, showing no remorse for the lives he'd taken, the pain he'd caused, the families he'd destroyed. After 2 weeks of testimony, the prosecution rested, had presented overwhelming evidence, had proven Brooks' guilt beyond any doubt, beyond any reasonable doubt, had shown intentionality, had shown malice, had shown that Brooks deliberately drove through the parade, deliberately killed 6 people, deliberately injured 61 others. Now it was Brooks' turn to present his defense, to explain, to provide an alternative narrative, to create doubt. Brooks had nothing, called no witnesses, presented no evidence, just made a statement, rambling, incoherent, about jurisdiction, about sovereignty, about being prosecuted for being a melanated man. Nothing about the parade, nothing about the victims, nothing that resembled a defense. The jury looked confused. The judge looked exasperated. The families looked devastated. This was it. This was all Brooks had. Nonsense, deflection, narcissism. As we continue this horrific case, share, subscribe, and turn on notifications. What happened in Waukesha shows how bail reform can turn deadly. On October 26, 2022, closing arguments began. The prosecution went first, summarized the evidence, reminded the jury of what they'd seen, what they'd heard. Video footage of Brooks driving through the parade, witness testimony, forensic evidence, computer data, medical testimony. Everything pointed to guilt, to intentional homicide, to reckless endangerment. The prosecutor spoke passionately, emotionally, about the victims, about Jackson Sparks, 8 years old, about the dancing grannies, about Jane Coolidge, about Wilhelm Hospital, about all 67 victims, dead and injured, about the families, about the community, about justice. The jury listened intently. Some nodded. Some cried. The prosecution's closing was powerful, compelling, undeniable. Then it was Brooks' turn. His closing argument. His last chance to persuade the jury, to create doubt, to save himself from life in prison. Brooks stood, began speaking, and immediately went off the rails. Started talking about subject matter jurisdiction, about how the court had no authority over him, about how he was a sovereign citizen, about how the entire trial was illegal. The judge interrupted, told Brooks to address the evidence, to talk about the charges, to make a legal argument. Brooks ignored her, kept rambling about jurisdiction, about the flag, about conspiracy theories. This went on for over an hour of nonsense, of legal gibberish, of nothing that resembled a defense. The jury looked baffled. The judge looked exhausted. The families looked angry. This was Brooks' closing argument. This was all he had. And it was pathetic. The jury began deliberations on October 26, 2022. They had 77 counts to consider. 6 counts of first-degree intentional homicide. 61 counts of recklessly endangering safety. Multiple counts of hit and run. Bail jumping. The evidence was overwhelming. The verdict should have been quick. And it was. The jury deliberated for just over 3 hours. A short time for such a serious case. For so many counts. But the evidence left no room for doubt. No room for debate. Darrell Brooks was guilty. Everyone knew it. The jury knew it. The question was never if, but when. On October 26, 2022, at approximately 6 p.m., the jury returned. Had reached a verdict. The courtroom filled. Victims' families, survivors, media, community members, everyone waiting, everyone knowing what was coming, but needing to hear it, needing it to be official. The judge asked the jury foreman for the verdicts. The foreman stood, began reading. Count 1, first-degree intentional homicide of Jackson Sparks. We find the defendant guilty. The courtroom reacted. Some cried. Some nodded. Jackson's parents sobbed. Their son's killer had been convicted. Count 2, first-degree intentional homicide of Virginia Sorensen. Guilty. Again tears. Again pain. But also relief. Justice. The foreman continued. Count 3, guilty. Count 4, guilty. Count 5, guilty. Count 6, guilty. All 6 homicide counts. Guilty. Darrell Brooks had been convicted of murdering 6 people. But the verdicts didn't stop there. The foreman continued. Count 7, recklessly endangering safety. Guilty. And on and on. All 61 counts of recklessly endangering safety. Guilty. All 6 counts of hit and run causing death. Guilty. All 2 counts of hit and run causing injury. Guilty. All 2 counts of bail jumping. Guilty. 77 counts total. 77 guilty verdicts. Every single charge. Convicted. Darrell Brooks sat emotionless. Showed no reaction. No surprise. No remorse. Nothing. Just stared ahead. Like the verdicts didn't matter. Like his life wasn't over. Like he hadn't just been convicted of one of the worst mass killings in Wisconsin history. The judge thanked the jury. Dismissed them. Scheduled sentencing for November 2022. The families left the courtroom. Some relieved. Some still crying. Some angry that it took this long. That Brooks had been allowed to terrorize the courtroom for weeks. To re-traumatize them. To mock the process. But at least now he was convicted. Would face consequences. Would spend the rest of his life in prison. Would never hurt anyone again. Would never drive through another parade. Never kill another child. Never destroy another family. Between conviction and sentencing, victims and their families prepared impact statements. Statements they'd read in court. Telling Brooks, telling the judge, telling the world what he'd done to them, how he'd destroyed their lives, how they'd never be whole again. The dancing grannies prepared statements. Jackson Sparks' family prepared statements. Every victim, every family, preparing to confront Brooks, to speak their truth. to demand maximum punishment, to ensure Brooks would never see freedom again. November 15, 2022, sentencing day. The courtroom was packed. Standing room only. Victims, families, survivors, media, community members. Everyone came. Everyone wanted to see Brooks sentenced. Wanted to hear what the families would say. Wanted justice delivered. The proceedings began. The judge explained the sentencing process. Brooks had been convicted of 77 counts. Each count carried a potential sentence. Some carried mandatory life sentences. Others carried decades. The total potential sentence was life in prison. Multiple life sentences, plus hundreds of additional years. Brooks would die in prison, would never be released. That was certain. The only question was how the judge would structure the sentences. But before sentencing, the victims would speak, would deliver their impact statements, would tell Brooks what he'd done, what he'd taken, what he'd destroyed. This would take hours. Over 40 people wanted to speak. Victims, family members, survivors, first responders, community members, all devastated, all traumatized, all wanting to be heard. The judge allowed them all to speak, gave them time, gave them space, gave them respect, something Brooks had never given anyone. The victim impact statements began. One by one, people took the stand, faced Darrell Brooks, and told him what he'd done. The first was a survivor, a young woman who'd been struck by Brooks' SUV, who'd suffered broken bones, internal injuries, months of recovery. She described the impact, the pain, the fear, wondering if she'd die, wondering if she'd ever walk again. She described the surgeries, the physical therapy, the ongoing pain, the nightmares, the PTSD, the fear of cars, of parades, of crowds, how Brooks had stolen her sense of safety, her joy, her ability to live normally. She looked directly at Brooks, told him she hoped he'd rot in prison, hoped he'd never know freedom again. Brooks stared at the table, showed no emotion, no remorse, nothing. Next came family members of the dancing grannies who died. Virginia Sorensen's daughter spoke, described her mother, her kindness, her love of dancing, her joy, how she'd volunteered for decades, how she'd brought happiness to thousands, how Brooks had stolen her, had killed her, for no reason, just because he could. The daughter broke down on the stand, could barely speak. Her pain was palpable, raw, devastating. Everyone in the courtroom cried, everyone except Brooks, who sat emotionless, uncaring. Leanna Owen's family spoke, described Leanna, her life, her family, her love of the dancing grannies, how she'd looked forward to the parade every year, how excited she'd been that day, how she'd never come home, how Brooks had killed her, how he'd destroyed their family, how holidays would never be the same, how every celebration would be marked by absence, by grief, by the hole Leanna left behind. They spoke directly to Brooks, told him he was a monster, told him he deserved to suffer, told him they'd never forgive him. Never. Brooks looked away, looked at the ceiling, looked anywhere but at the families he'd destroyed. Tamara Duran's family spoke, described Tamara, a teacher who loved children, who dedicated her life to education, who danced with the dancing grannies as a hobby, as joy, as community service. Brooks took her, killed her, for nothing. Her students mourned. Her family mourned. The community mourned. The family described the funeral, the grief, the impossibility of moving forward, of living in a world without Tamara. They thanked the jury, thanked the judge, begged for maximum sentencing, for Brooks to never see daylight again. The judge nodded, listened, showed compassion, something Brooks had never shown anyone. Wilhelm Hospel's family spoke, described Wilhelm, 81 years old, a good man, kind man, who was at the parade to help, to support the dancing grannies, to be useful, to serve his community. Brooks drove over him, killed him, an 81-year-old man, who'd done nothing wrong, who was just being kind. The The family's anger was intense, palpable. They screamed at Brooks, called him evil, called him a murderer, told him he'd burn in hell. Brooks still showed nothing. No reaction, no acknowledgement, like he wasn't even there, like this wasn't about him, like he hadn't killed these people. Jane Coolidge's family spoke, described Jane, 52 years old, a bank employee, participating in the parade, representing her employer, excited, happy. Brooks killed her, destroyed her family. Her co-workers spoke too, described the loss, the grief, the empty desk, the silence where Jane's laughter used to be. They'd established a memorial fund in Jane's name, to help parade victims, to honor her memory, to make something good come from something evil. They thanked the jury, thanked the prosecution, asked the judge to ensure Brooks would never hurt anyone again. Then came the Sparks family, Jackson's parents, his brother, his extended family. They spoke about Jackson, 8 years old, third grader, baseball player, happy child, loving son, excited brother. Jackson had been walking in the parade with his baseball team, wearing his uniform, proud, happy. Brooks drove over him, critically injured him. Jackson fought for 2 days, in the hospital, in pain, on machines. His family prayed, hoped, begged for a miracle. The miracle didn't come. Jackson died, 8 years old, his whole life stolen, by Darrell Brooks, who drove an SUV through a Christmas parade. Jackson's mother spoke, could barely get words out, described her son, his smile, his laugh, his dreams of playing professional baseball, his kindness, how he loved animals, loved his family, loved life, how Brooks took all of that, killed him, destroyed her, destroyed their family. She described Jackson's last moments, holding his hand, telling him she loved him, watching him die, the worst moment of her life, the moment she'd relive forever, because of Darrell Brooks. She looked at Brooks, told him she hoped he'd suffer, told him he was a monster, told him Jackson's death would haunt her forever. Brooks looked at the ceiling, showed nothing, no remorse, no acknowledgement, no humanity. Jackson's father spoke. His anger was different, colder, more controlled, but more intense. He described what Brooks had taken, not just his son, but his future, his grandchildren he'd never have, the baseball games he'd never attend, the graduations, the weddings, all gone, all stolen, by Brooks, who sat there looking bored, looking inconvenienced. The father told Brooks he hoped prison would be hell, hoped every day would be torture, hoped Brooks would think about Jackson every single day, would remember what he'd done, would suffer for it. The courtroom was silent, everyone crying, everyone devastated, everyone except Brooks. The statements continued. For hours, over 40 people spoke. Victims with broken bones, with brain injuries, with PTSD, with nightmares, with ongoing pain. Children who'd witnessed horror, who'd seen death, who'd lost their innocence. Parents who'd watched their children get struck, who'd thought they'd lost them. First responders who'd worked the scene, who'd seen the carnage, who'd tried to save lives, who'd failed sometimes, who carried guilt, who carried trauma, all because of Darrell Brooks, who sat at the defense table, showing nothing, feeling nothing, being nothing. When the victim statements finally ended, the judge spoke, addressed Brooks directly, told him he'd committed one of the most heinous crimes in Wisconsin history, had killed 6 innocent people, had injured 61 others, had traumatized thousands, had destroyed families, had attacked a community, had shown no remorse, no empathy, no humanity. The judge said she'd presided over many trials, many sentencings, but had never seen evil like this, had never seen someone as remorseless as Brooks, had never seen someone deserve maximum punishment more. The judge was ready to impose sentence, to ensure Brooks would never see freedom, would die in prison, would pay for what he'd done, to Jackson, to the dancing grannies, to Jane, to Wilhelm, to all 67 victims, to Waukesha. As we continue this horrific case, like, share, subscribe, and turn on notifications. What happened in Waukesha shows how bail reform can turn deadly. Judge Jennifer Darrell began imposing sentence. Started with the homicide counts. Each carried a mandatory life sentence. For the first-degree intentional homicide of Jackson Sparks, I sentence you to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Life. For killing an 8-year-old boy. Brooks showed no reaction. The judge continued. For the first-degree intentional homicide of Virginia Sorensen, life in prison without parole. Another life sentence. For the homicide of Leanna Owen, life in prison without parole. Another. For Tamara Durand, life in prison without parole. Another. For Wilhelm Hospital, life in prison without parole. Another. For Jane Coolidge, life in prison without parole. 6 life sentences. 6 consecutive life sentences. Meaning Brooks would serve them one after another. Not concurrently. He'd serve life for Jackson, then life for Virginia, then life for Leanna, then life for Tamara, then life for Wilhelm, then life for Jane. Impossible to serve, because Brooks would die in prison, long before finishing even one life sentence. But the symbolism mattered. Each victim mattered. Each life mattered. Each sentence represented a life stolen, family destroyed, justice for that victim. But the judge wasn't done. 61 counts of recklessly endangering safety remained. Each carried a maximum of 12.5 years. The judge imposed the maximum on each count. 12.5 years. Times 61. That's 762.5 additional years. On top of the 6 life sentences. The judge ordered these sentences to run consecutively too. One after another. Brooks would serve 6 life sentences, plus 762.5 years, plus additional time for the hit and run counts, plus additional time for bail jumping. The total sentence was incomprehensible, impossible to serve, but it made a statement. Each victim mattered. Each injury mattered. Each crime deserved punishment. Brooks had committed 77 crimes, would receive 77 punishments, would spend the rest of his life in prison, would die there, alone, forgotten, while his victims were remembered, honored, missed. After imposing sentence, Judge Darrell addressed Brooks one final time, told him he'd had every opportunity, every chance. The system had given him chance after chance. 50+ arrests, light sentences, probation, releases, over and over. He'd been given opportunities that many people never get, and he'd squandered them all, had continued offending, had escalated, had become more violent, more dangerous, more destructive, and on November 21st, 2021, he'd driven through a Christmas parade, had killed 6 people, had injured 61 others, had traumatized a community, had shown the world who he really was, a monster, a murderer, someone with no empathy, no remorse, no humanity. The judge said she hoped Brooks would think about his victims every day, would remember what he'd done, would carry that burden, would suffer for it. Then she ended the hearing. Brooks was taken away, back to jail, where he'd be processed, then transferred to a maximum security prison, where he'd spend the rest of his life, until he died, alone. The families left the courtroom. Some felt relief. Some felt empty. Some felt angry that it was over, that they'd never face Brooks again, that this chapter was closing. But their pain wasn't over, would never be over. The sentences brought justice, not healing, not closure, not their loved ones back. Virginia was still dead. Leanna was still dead. Tamara was still dead. Wilhelm was still dead. Jane was still dead. Jackson was still dead. 8 years old. Gone. Forever. Because Darrell Brooks drove an SUV through a Christmas parade. The families would carry this pain for the rest of their lives. Would miss their loved ones every day. Every holiday. Every birthday. Every celebration. Forever marked by absence. By loss. By the hole left behind. The 61 people who survived with injuries would carry their pain too. Physical pain, ongoing medical issues, disabilities, limitations, things they could no longer do, ways they'd been permanently changed, and psychological pain, PTSD, nightmares, anxiety, depression, fear, inability to feel safe, to trust, to enjoy parades or crowds or holidays, all stolen by Brooks, all damaged by his actions. Some would recover partially, some would never recover fully, all would be different, forever. The community of Waukesha was changed too, forever. The Christmas parade had been a cherished tradition. 58 years, generations of families attending, making memories, celebrating together. Brooks destroyed that, shattered the innocence, shattered the safety, showed that evil could come anywhere, could attack anything, even a small-town Christmas parade. The 2022 parade was canceled. Too soon, too traumatic, too painful. People weren't ready, couldn't bear it. The city held memorial events instead, honored the victims, supported survivors, came together in grief. In 2023, the parade returned. Smaller, more somber, more security, more awareness. But it came back, because Waukesha wouldn't let Brooks win, wouldn't let him destroy their tradition, their community, their joy. The parade would continue. For Virginia, for Leanna, for Tamara, for Wilhelm, for Jane, for Jackson, in their memory, in their honor. The case raised important questions, national questions, about bail reform, about progressive prosecution policies, about whether the criminal justice system prioritizes criminals over victims, over public safety, over communities. Brooks had over 50 prior arrests, had committed violent crimes repeatedly, had tried to run over his girlfriend just weeks before the parade, and was released on $1,000 bail. $1,000 for a violent repeat offender. The Milwaukee County DA's office admitted this was a mistake, said the prosecutor made an error, didn't properly review Brooks' history, didn't assess the danger, but the admission didn't bring back the victims, didn't prevent the attack, didn't help the families, just acknowledged that the system failed. Catastrophically, the case sparked debates about bail, about who should be detained pretrial, about how to balance defendants' rights with public safety, about whether repeat offenders should get bail at all. Conservatives pointed to Brooks as proof that bail reform was dangerous, that progressive policies prioritized criminals, that public safety required keeping dangerous people locked up. Liberals argued that one case didn't invalidate entire reform efforts, that cash bail discriminated against poor defendants, that the system needed fixing but not abandoning. The debates were heated, passionate, important, but for Waukesha they came too late. The victims were already dead, the community already traumatized, the damage already done. Brooks was in prison, but 6 people were still dead, 61 were still injured, thousands were still traumatized, and nothing would change that. Nothing would bring back Jackson Sparks. Nothing would undo November 21, 2021. Darrell Brooks is currently serving his sentence at Waupun Correctional Institution in Wisconsin, a maximum security prison, where he'll spend the rest of his life. He's in his early 40s now, could live another 30 or 40 years, all in prison, all in a cell, all separated from society, from freedom, from the world he tried to destroy on November 21, 2021. Brooks will never be released, will never see freedom, will die in prison. This is certain. This is justice. But it's cold comfort to the families he destroyed, to the victims he injured, to the community he traumatized. The victims are not forgotten. Waukesha has memorialized them, established monuments, named things in their honor, created scholarships, set up funds, ensuring their names live on, ensuring their lives mattered, ensuring they're remembered not just as victims, but as people, as mothers, grandmothers, teachers, bank employees, helpers, dancers, an 8-year-old boy who loved baseball. Virginia Sorensen, Leanna Owen, Tamara Durand, Wilhelm Hospel, Jane Coolidge, Jackson Sparks. Their names are spoken, their stories told, their memories honored. The Milwaukee dancing grannies continue. They rebuilt, recruited new members, kept dancing, in memory of the 3 members they lost. They dance now with heavy hearts, with memories of Virginia, Leanna, and Tamara. But they dance, because that's what their fallen members would have wanted. Because Waukesha wouldn't let Brooks destroy this tradition, this joy, this community institution. The grannies dance on, for the victims, for themselves, for Waukesha. Jackson Sparks' family established a foundation in his name, the Jackson Sparks Foundation, supporting youth baseball, supporting children, keeping Jackson's memory alive, keeping his love of baseball alive, helping other kids achieve their dreams. The dreams Jackson never got to achieve, because Darrell Brooks killed him. The foundation has helped hundreds of children, has given scholarships, has provided equipment, has made Jackson's short life meaningful, has ensured his death wasn't in vain. His parents continue to grieve, will grieve forever, but also continue to honor, to remember, to love their son, their 8-year-old who loved baseball, who had his whole life ahead of him, who deserved to grow up, to play high school baseball, college baseball, maybe professional baseball, to fall in love, get married, have children, have a life, all stolen by Brooks. The 61 survivors continue their journeys. Some have recovered physically, others still deal with injuries, disabilities, ongoing pain. All deal with psychological trauma. PTSD is common. Nightmares, anxiety, fear of crowds, of parades, of cars, of holidays. Some have sought therapy. Some have found support groups. Some have found healing in community, in connection, in sharing their experiences. Others struggle alone, silently, carrying pain they can't express, can't share, can't overcome. The attack changed them all, forever. Some are stronger for it, have found meaning in survival, have become advocates, have helped others, have turned trauma into purpose. Others are just trying to survive, to get through each day, to live despite what happened, despite what Brooks did to them. The first responders who worked the scene carry trauma too. Police officers, paramedics, firefighters, who arrived to find bodies in the street, injured children, chaos, horror, who had to triage, decide who to help first, who could wait, who couldn't be saved, who had to notify families, collect evidence, document the scene, while processing their own trauma, their own horror, their own humanity confronted with evil. Many sought counseling. Many still struggle, with images they can't forget, with sounds, with smells, with the memory of November 21st, 2021, when their community was attacked, when innocence was shattered, when they saw the worst of humanity in Darrell Brooks. The Waukesha community has healed, slowly, painfully, imperfectly. The 2023 Christmas parade was emotional, bittersweet. Thousands attended, to remember, to honor, to reclaim their tradition. There was more security, more police, more awareness, but also more unity, more love, more determination. Waukesha wouldn't let Brooks win, wouldn't let him destroy their community, their joy, their tradition. The parade went on, in memory of the 6 who died, in support of the 61 who survived, in defiance of the evil that tried to destroy them. The community came together, stronger, more resilient, more committed to each other, to their town, to their values. Brooks had tried to destroy Waukesha. He failed. The community survived, grew stronger, proved that love is stronger than hate, that community is stronger than evil, that Waukesha is stronger than Darrell Brooks. But the questions remain. How did this happen? How was Brooks free? How did someone with 50-plus arrests, multiple violent convictions, and a recent attempt to run over his girlfriend get released on $1,000 bail? The The Milwaukee County DA's office reviewed their procedures, made changes, increased oversight, required more thorough bail recommendations, required consideration of criminal history, required assessment of danger. These changes came too late for Waukesha, too late for the victims, but might prevent future tragedies, might keep future Darrell Brooks locked up, might save future Jacksons, future Virginias, future communities. The case remains a cautionary tale about criminal justice reform, about balancing rights with safety, about the cost of getting it wrong, about the price paid by victims when the system fails, about the importance of recognizing danger, of keeping dangerous people away from society, of protecting the innocent. Darrell Brooks should never have been free on November 21st, 2021. Should have been in jail for trying to run over his girlfriend. Should have been in prison for his prior convictions. Should have been kept away from people. The system failed, and 6 people died. 61 were injured. Thousands were traumatized. Community was attacked because of a $1,000 bail decision, because someone didn't properly review Brooks' history, didn't assess the danger, didn't protect the public. The consequences were catastrophic, were fatal, were irreversible. Darrell Brooks sits in his cell, serving 6 life sentences plus 762.5 years. He'll die in prison. This is certain. This is just. But it doesn't undo what he did. Doesn't bring back the victims. Doesn't heal the injured. Doesn't comfort the families. Doesn't restore the community. Justice was served. Brooks was convicted, was sentenced, is imprisoned. But justice is cold, is incomplete, is insufficient, because Virginia is still dead. Leanna is still dead. Tamara is still dead. Wilhelm is still dead. Jane is still dead. Jackson is still dead. 8 years old. Forever. And 61 people are still injured. Still traumatized. Still changed. And a community is still healing. Still remembering. Still honoring. Their victims. Their survivors. Their strength. Their resilience. Their refusal to let evil win. Rest in peace, Virginia Sorensen, Leanna Owen, Tamara Durand, Wilhelm Hospel, Jane Coolidge, and Jackson Sparks. You went to a Christmas parade. You brought joy. You danced. You helped. You participated. You celebrated. And Darrell Brooks drove an SUV through the parade and killed you. You deserved life. You deserved safety. You deserved to dance, to help, to celebrate, to live. Brooks took that from you. Took everything. But you're not forgotten. Your names are remembered. Your lives honored. Your memories cherished. By your families. By your community. By everyone who knew you. And by those who never met you but remember your story. You matter. Your deaths mattered. Your lives mattered. And Darrell Brooks will pay. Is paying. Will pay for the rest of his life. In prison. Where he belongs. Where he'll die. Alone. While you're remembered. Honored. Loved. Forever. Darrell Brooks was convicted of killing 6 people and injuring 61 others at the Waukesha Christmas parade. Like, share, subscribe, and hot the notification bell to honor the victims and demand accountability in our justice system. Stay safe, stay aware, and I'll see you in my next case.